On September 1st, the state eviction moratorium will be lifted. What you need to know, whether you're a renter, a property owner, or just a concerned citizen. That's coming up on Nevada Week.
Support for Nevada Week is provided by Senator William H. Hernstadt and additional supporting sponsors.
According to the Gwynn Center, up to 300,000 Nevadans could be vulnerable for evictions when the moratorium ends on September 1st. To help soften the blow, federal, state, and local legislative sessions have implemented solutions, including rental relief and tenant-landlord mediation programs. But after an influx of applicants, rental relief funding is depleted, and time is running out before evictions once again begin on September 1st. Adding to the concern, experts say that housing insecurity and evictions could last years, not months, and will affect our most vulnerable Nevadans. Joining us to discuss this potential housing crisis and what options we have to mitigate it are Jim Berchtold, directing attorney for the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada's Consumer Rights Project, Alexandria Brown, Executive Director at Southern Nevada Community Health Improvement Programs, better known as CHIP, and Bill Brewer, Executive Director and President of the Nevada Housing Coalition. And finally, Nevada State Treasurer Zach Conning. Well, Bill, Jim, thank you for returning to Nevada Week. We really appreciate you being on the show. And Alexandria, first time on Nevada Week, but equally excited to have you as part of this discussion. We want to get right into it. We're on the eve of September 1st. The eviction moratorium is ending. Jim, let's start with you. What happens then?
So that's the big question mark, right? Nobody knows exactly what happens then. September 1st, all evictions are allowed, meaning the rental evictions, which are going to be the big pot of evictions, can go forward. They have been on moratorium, even as the eviction moratorium gradually lifted, rental evictions were prohibited until September 1st. We don't know what's going to happen. We're trying to prep. We're trying to anticipate everyone's needs. We're trying to anticipate the flood of evictions that we think is going to occur according to all the numbers that we're seeing. But there's really no way to prepare for it, honestly.
What's kind of your sense, though? I mean, do you think that we're just going to have this blanket of evictions? Or I know we'll talk a little bit later about some of the policies that have been set up here to maybe mitigate that. But do you think September 1st comes and we're just going to see a blanket of eviction notices getting on doors?
Well, that's the big fear, right? We have been receiving calls from tenants and from landlords for months and months, from landlords trying to figure out how to get their tenants out, from tenants who are being notified by their landlord that as soon as the eviction moratorium lifts, they're going to be evicted. So we have every reason to believe that September 1st rolls around and all those people that have been waiting to evict are going to be evicted. So that's our big fear. There's nothing in place right now. There is, that there was a mediation program that was in the works. That is not up and running. There's no sense that the moratorium is going to be extended. There's nothing at the federal level happening. So right now, September 1st, there are no protections for tenants. So everything rolls forward.
Alexandria, Jim's saying that not a lot of protections in place here. Your boots on the ground here. You were administering a lot of the relief that we did have, the rental relief we did have over the last month. Let's get your perspective on here. What are some of your biggest concerns directly with the clients and the applicants that you're dealing with?
So, of course, our biggest concerns are that our clients are going to be put out, right? Evictions start on the 1st. They can be put out as early as the 5th or the 6th, depending on timing. And we have just our agency alone, we have over 20,000 applications for rental assistance that we haven't even gotten to yet, just because of the timing with the process. Our process can take up to 30 days. We're processing anywhere from about 300 to 400 payments a week. And one of the things that we're running into with landlords is some landlords won't even sign the paperwork to get payment because they're like, this says that it can take up to 30 days and we're putting them out on the 1st. So we're not even going to try to accept the funding, even though we have the funding there. And we're like, we Like, we'll let you know before September 1st for some of them if they're going to be approved. It'll just take a while for the payment. And some landlords are just not willing to even do the paperwork because they're like, no, come September 1st, the tenant is out. So,
Alexandria, is it because maybe the amount that property owners are owed here? What's the average applicant amount here? Is it just for 1 month of rent? Is it just a small amount?
So it depends. Some folks are 3 months of rent. The funding that we have, we can go back to March when it was announced as a pandemic. So we have some months that are going from March through September. I think so far the biggest amount that we've paid in rental was probably about $12,000. And so I think for the landlords, when you have multiple tenants not paying, you have a mortgage to pay or you have responsibilities to pay. And so I think they're just as frustrated not knowing what to do and what the best options are.
As far as who is applying for these funds, are we tracking any type of geographic information? Or, of course, we've noticed across the board with COVID-19 that persons of color, vulnerable populations, low-income populations are being affected across the board. Is it the same with housing?
I think that it is the same with housing. I don't have any exact numbers. We are collecting that data, but right now we haven't reviewed that particular data because our focus is on just getting the checks out as soon as possible. But we do have that data, and hopefully in the next month, we'll be able to kind of extract some of that to see who it has been affecting.
So, Bill, we've been talking a lot about some of the urban concerns here. Let's talk about the rural side of things. How does it compare and contrast with some of the challenges that we're seeing on the urban side?
Actually, the challenges are very similar. When you look at the numbers from Clark County and the numbers from the rurals, of course, Clark County has much greater numbers, but we're running about 6-1. In other words, for every 6 people who need assistance in Clark County, we're seeing 1 in rurals. Same for dollars. Our average assistance amount is about the same as Clark County. Of course, our needs are spread all over rural Nevada, so we're helping folks everywhere from Carson City to Lincoln County and everywhere in between.
Jim, call center. We talked before the show started here that your demand has not changed at all. As a matter of fact, you're saying as we near the moratorium, it's getting even greater. What kind of calls are you getting? What are some of the major issues that clients are presenting to you right now?
So it's really across the board. The types of issues that you would see is the lift of the moratorium approaches. The calls get more desperate and desperate. People waiting for unemployment, people who have been laid off and simply don't know what to do. People who have received eviction notices that are possibly improper and aren't sure how to handle them. People who have been trying to work with their landlords or who have been in discussions with their landlords and are fairly certain that they're going to be evicted come September 1 and simply have no resources. They've burned through all the money that they received for unemployment when the unemployment was increased, or they haven't even received their unemployment yet. So we have some really desperate people in some desperate situations.
Now, the Gwynn Center has reported that between 272,000 and 327,000 Nevadans could struggle to pay rent when we get to the moratorium ending on September 1st. That is a significant amount of people, especially when you're looking at our rental population alone. That's roughly 25% of the rental population right there. I mean, are we seeing that type of scope on the horizon? Are we already seeing it, Alexandria? You mentioned 20,000 applicants you still need to potentially process. Are we seeing indicators of that type of scope here?
Most definitely. When we're looking at the numbers, that's just our numbers. There's a number of other agencies who have received funding. And I think between all the agencies, there's well over 200,000 people who are reaching out, trying to get some assistance and trying to get some funding. So definitely.
That's an unbelievable amount of applicants already, 200,000. We're already at those numbers, Bill. And this is when we're talking about housing crisis, especially in the rental market here. Let's look back at the recession in 2008. It took years before we got to our highest levels of evictions. So are we potentially looking at a much larger eviction rate, more people concerned with housing insecurity when we look beyond just the next couple months?
I think there's definitely a potential for that. Of course, this is a different situation than the last recession we faced, which was based on housing. The recession is different. But based on what we saw in that recession, the peak eviction rate didn't occur until a couple of years after the crisis. And so we may see a similar wave in the aftermath of this crisis.
So let's talk about solutions then. Of course, relief is the biggest piece of this, more funding. We had to close applications, if I understand, Alexandria, because we were nearing the end of the amount of funding that we had allocated at the county and state level. We have our federal government right now. Congress is in a stalemate to potentially allocate more relief. Bill, where's the easiest way for us to get relief right now?
Easiest way to get relief right now is to go to the Nevada Housing Division website and find where you need to contact. It'll give you a link to Clark County and all of the agencies administering funding there. It'll give you a link to the Reno Housing Authority, which is administering funding in Washoe County, and give you a link to our site for all of the rural counties. There's plenty of CHAP money or assistance money right now for those counties. Of course, Clark has closed their applications temporarily, so we look for them to be back up, and I'd be surprised if we can't get some additional funding in Clark County.
And Jim, I want to ask you the same question, resources that you're directing some of your clients to right now?
Well, so right now, you can submit an application for rental funding in Clark County. So that's not a resource. As far as we know, there are no resources for tenants out there. There are some limited protections still under the CARES Act, depending on what type of housing you live in. But as far as money or moratorium or other types of relief, we don't know. We don't know where to send people.
Let's look at potentially the most low-hanging fruit here, and we're talking a policy change. You mentioned, Jim, the CARES Act money here. Of course, there's restrictions on how that money can be used. Is there potential tweaks that you see to that system, lessening restrictions, so that money can be easily allocated at the municipal level or the state level towards things like rental assistance?
Oh, I think so, definitely. I think the money that has been allocated towards rental assistance, actually the restrictions are quite minimal. The county, the state did a great job kind of putting this program together on the fly. Basically, as they were flying the plane, they were putting this program together, trying to get this out on the street. And I think the requirements for receiving the assistance are actually quite generous. It's just the logistics of trying to process the applications and get the money out. And there is no way that they are going to be processed in sufficient time to avoid what is certainly going to be a flood come September 1.
Alexandria, municipal ordinances, we've seen some of those recently, especially limiting selective discrimination around leases, depending on what the origin of the funding is. Do you see this as an avenue? Again, we're talking more immediate solutions over the next couple months, but are there local or county or city level ordinances you think could really alleviate some of the pressure here?
So I think that some of the new ordinances will alleviate some future pressure. So kind of some of the what's the word I'm looking for? The long-term effects will be alleviated, because as landlords take these hits, who they rent to may be even more selective in the future. So I think some of the local ordinances will protect tenants based on that. Right now, it would be great if we could get an extended moratorium, just because we have the funding just to give us some time to get the money out to folks. So,
Bill, extended moratorium, any chance for that, do you think, state level?
That's a good question. I know the court's preparing for that now with SB1 that was just passed in the recent special session, and they're trying to get that put into place so we have a 30-day window at least. We can give some folks a little room to get in touch with those resources. Hard to say if additional moratorium would come or not. I'm not seeing it on the horizon. There hasn't been any discussion about that.
And Jim, SB1, special legislative policy passed, or law passed, special dispute resolution court was part of that. As you mentioned early on in our interview here, this isn't up and running yet. In theory, when it is up and running, what exactly is that going to do?
So what it will really do is give the opportunity for landlords and tenants to sit down and talk about the current situation and see if there's a way that they can both beneficially come to some resolution to work out some kind of plan. Ideally, if there is at that point rental assistance available, that would be a great system to link them both up to that rental assistance, potentially even having somebody from one of these nonprofit agencies participate in the mediation to discuss possible payments to the landlord to let the tenant stay in the current situation. That's really the benefit of mediation, is it allows people to come together and talk and come up with creative solutions that you would never be able to reach if you were standing in front of a judge in eviction court.
And the way that that law is written, is this going to be a requirement for anybody that receives an eviction notice?
So that's not really encompassed in the law. What all the law says is that the court is authorized to create this program by rule. So a committee of interested stakeholders right now is working on the rule. What exactly the contours of the rule will look like ultimately, I don't know.
Well, we're out of time, but Bill, Jim, Alexandria, great discussion. Very much appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you so much. Well, we're very happy to have Zach Conan here, the Nevada State Treasurer. Thank you so much, Zach, for being here. I wanted to jump right into this. The first question I asked the panel prior to talking to you was just, we're on the eve of the eviction moratorium ending on September 1st. And I wanted to know, coming out of the Treasurer's office and the state in general, what are some of your biggest concerns right now?
Well, when we look at the eviction crisis, our biggest concern is making sure the Nevadans can stay in their homes, because we know that housing instability is one of the biggest barriers to a future economic recovery. Ignoring the fact that housing instability is immoral and unjust, we know that it's really going to be a problem down the road as we come out and our economy starts to recover if people have that level of housing instability. It was a problem during the Great Recession, and it'll be a problem going forward if we don't solve it.
Do we have any idea, the scope of the problem, first off, and we'll talk about numbers in a second, but just, we've been, of course, in this flux of the pandemic since March. That's multiple months. Do we have any idea the average renter that's out there and the average renter that's maybe applying or has applied for some of the state relief we have? I mean, is this becoming a chronic problem? Is this, multiple months of rent that we need on average? Is it just that there's just a little bit that they need to kind of cover the rent?
I think a lot like Nevada, it really depends on the person, right? We're different scenarios in different parts of the state, different scenarios based on industry, when a person was furloughed, if they were furloughed, whether or not they were able to get access to unemployment insurance quickly, or if that process has taken them a bit longer. So we're seeing some individuals who need help with a partial month of rent. We're seeing some individuals who need help all the way back to March. So the program was set up in such a way that we can get funds out hopefully quickly to as many people as possible and really help them to the level of assistance that they need. But that need, to your point, is significant.
Now, Zach, we talked to Alexandria Brown. She was one of our panelists. We had Southern Nevada CHIPS, one of the organizations that's accepting applications, administering funds. She estimated that there might be, in the entire network statewide, 200,000 applicants at this stage. I wanted to get, do you have, what a specific number is right now?
The specific number of applicants statewide is somewhere around 40,000 inquiries. Now, we know that some inquiries don't become applications, some inquiries could be duplicated, and so part of the process is working with the different agencies who are helping to put the funds on the street to understand how big that demand is. We also know that as we move into September and people don't have access to that additional $600 a week in federal pandemic unemployment compensation, that need is going to grow. So the total size of the problem we expect is a few 100,000 Nevada households, which is obviously a really significant problem to deal with.
It is, and those numbers are consistent with what the Gwynn Center has reported recently, about the same, about 142,000 households. Looking at the Southern Nevada CHIPS website, applications are closed right now. We talked a little bit briefly about that with Alexandria. Can you give us more of a context on why the application process is closed right now?
Yeah, so what we decided to do was close the application process to allow some of those providers to get through their backlog of applications. Like I said, we've had about 33,000 inquiries just in Southern Nevada. And so moving those inquiries from inquiry to application to approval to funded, we wanted to make sure we took a pause there. We also, as we're seeing the averages change on a week-to-week basis, we want to make sure that we're not giving people false hope and taking in applications that we don't think are going to be able to be funded. So our hope is, as we get more data, as the data gets a little more specific, that we'll be able to open that program back up. We also might be able to open it back up if we're able to secure additional federal funding for that program.
And where is that federal funding going to come from? Are you dependent right now that the HEROES Act or some other relief package that's going to be put together would then provide that funding? Are you looking at potentially existing funding we have from CARES potentially being allocated that way?
So I think those are both two great options. Looking at existing funding, there's obviously much more need than there are resources. We have effectively an infinite problem with finite resources. So trying to determine whether or not those funds are best spent on the health response or contact tracing or rental assistance or food assistance or broadband assistance, educational support, etc. We've just got a lot of problems to solve for, which is why we support additional federal funding that can go to help with all of those problems, whether it's the HEROES Act or some other act like that. This is a national pandemic. This is a pandemic that has been exasperated, frankly, by the national response, and as such, we need additional help federally to get through it.
We've talked a lot about tenants and renters. Let's talk a little bit about property owners. You give us some perspective on just where property owners are at. First off, how many mom and pop owners do we have out there that are struggling in the same ways that some of our renters and tenants are? And how big of a scope of a problem is that you're hearing about?
I think it's significant. In this state, as well as a lot of other Western states, property owners on the commercial side aren't always giant businesses from out of state managing multiple hundreds of properties, right? We have plenty of strip malls and small commercial centers that have one or two tenants in them. We've got plenty of folks who have chosen to use rental income as part of their retirement, right? So they purchased one or two homes, and they rent those homes out, and they need those funds. To that end, our office has been working to make sure that the funds go directly to the landlord, right? So that we avoid any sort of diversion or funds going for other purposes outside of rental relief. We've also been focused on helping to connect people with the resources that can be available from a federal standpoint on mortgage assistance. So if you are a landlord who is renting out your single family home, there may be mortgage assistance available to you at the federal level. For instance, just today, they expanded the Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, the GSEs, expanded the forbearance period until December 31st. And that's about 85% of Nevada mortgages. So, all of those things together help, which is why we think it's so important for landlords and tenants to be talking to one another.
Long-term impact on this, and let's just talk about the rental market itself. How much impact can this have on the state's economy if we can't get our rental market in order?
But I think it's significant, and I think one of the reasons we know it's going to be significant is we look at the impacts of the lack of affordable housing in Nevada going into this pandemic, right? Even before the pandemic continued to exacerbate that problem. I sit on the Board of Finance along with the governor and the controller and a few other folks, and this year we've committed more than $400 million to private activity bonds, which help to retain and grow affordable housing. We think that's exceptionally important, but again, it's just a drop in the bucket compared to the number of people who have housing concerns or paying more of their income to housing than is generally accepted across the country. And so we've got to solve that problem. But if we allow hundreds of thousands of Nevadans to be evicted, what ends up happening is that spirals through the rest of the economy, right? So most of our tax base is discretionary. It's based on people going out and spending money, right? And causing sales tax or gambling and causing gaming tax, not just on tourists, but also locals. And so to the extent that the federal support through things like that additional $600 through PUA, through the $1,200 stimulus check and the rest, a lot of that circulated back into the economy. And that kept our sales tax revenues at the state level okay. Right? I mean, obviously not as good as we wanted to and pretty significantly down, but better than feared because of that additional support. Without that additional federal support, without being able to keep people in their home broad level, I fear that we're really going to be dealing with the durations of that housing instability going for the next significant period of time. Every person who loses their home is another person that falls into a different social safety net, which is probably also underfunded, or leaves the state, or just has another barrier to getting back on their feet when they do get back to work. And so I think all of those things together can spiral on themselves, and that's why we've been spending so much time on it. Housing doesn't fall typically within the treasurer's office, but trying to make sure that the state is prepared from an investment perspective does. We don't have anything to invest if we don't get in tax revenue. So trying to make sure that we've got an economic recovery has been first and foremost on our minds.
Zach, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us this week on Nevada Week. Now, for anything that we've discussed on this show, please visit our website at vegaspbs.org/Nevada-week. You can also find us on social media at Nevada Week. And before we go, make sure to tune in next Friday, where we'll discuss supplemental resources available to help you and your children get through the school year.